Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Shankar Subramani here, and today we have a guest speaker. He is Arvind. Arvind is an organizational behavior and human capital consulting professional with 16 years of experience in management consulting firms like Deloitte and KPMG. His area of expertise are business planning, eminence building, key account management, engagement design, project management, engagement diversity, team building, practice accounting, and reporting. And he has served different countries like even India, Nepal, USA, UK, Europe, Africa, and the GCC. Today we are going to listen from him about the global business scenario 2020 and beyond. Since the current scenario is very unpredictable, he is going to explore how the new perspective in building an organization that can sustain and accelerate organizational efforts to drive organizational vision and challenge traditional organizational design practices. Also, he is going to offer key dimensions with practical examples of new age organizational design practices across industries. He is going to give us examples to allow leaders to adopt an eclectic approach to organizational transformation and, more importantly, acknowledge common traps in organizational design and its implementation. Now it's over to Arvind. Arvind, we welcome you on behalf of IIM Alumni Association, Tamil Nadu chapter.
Thank you, Shankar. I hope you all can hear me, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Yeah.
Great. Getting started with this topic, this is a very interesting topic. And business transformation that we see in the light of COVID in 2020 and beyond will be everybody's agenda. And business transformation strategies is something that we will try and explore in the next session in the session for about an hour or so. And before we get started, I wanted to lay out a few interesting and important points for us to be mindful of when we have this conversation. And these are certain key assumptions and limitations when we have this conversation. So the solutions and organizations quoted in this discussion are based on past experiences, of course, and some secondary research that I have performed for the purposes of this discussion. And these are meant for the purposes of this discussion alone. I would urge you to keep this in perspective, this conversation that we will be having today. Transformation strategies that we will look to explore obviously needs to be evolved, keeping in mind the industry that an organization is specifically in, the maturity, relative maturity within that industry, the geographies that they are participating in, that they have business interests in, thereby the risks that go underlying with that, and the needs of the organization, depending on if the organization is an early entrant, is an organization which is looking to stabilize in this industry, or a very mature player. And finally, I would also touch upon a new model, and that model is to help organizations prioritize and see where could certain decisions ultimately be prioritized. And this has not been previously tested, of course, but given the fact that we need something new to think about business transformation in the light of 2020 strategies and beyond, we're looking at what could be a simplistic model to help us look at ways to prioritize those initiatives for the organization. So I would want to leave this model with you, and the proposed model is yet to be tested. Getting started, and I wanted to spend a little more time to draw the backdrop. Forces that are external is influencing the way in which we are conducting business today. And operating models, which were primarily driven to meet the needs of efficiencies of the business, is now increasingly getting transitioned to continuity, business continuity, and sustainability measures, even if it were to temporarily withdraw or compromise efficiencies or costs. And this is what is happening with some of the themes that I've listed below. One being critical incidents. We are increasingly seeing that business continuity and sustainability till about 2019 were organizational priorities given their interests of carrying forward business, and also to be showing their commitment to the environment, social and governance aspects. Now, as you would see that in 2020 and beyond, supply chains are getting reconfigured. The very aspect of what business continuity that merely existed on papers have gotten tested in the times of COVID and beyond. And we are looking to reassess the very nature of how we perform outsourcing and in-housing of activities. Not to mention, of course, that the health, safety, environment, and human rights, that things that go along with sustainability, such as diversity and inclusion, health, safety, environment, the mere fabric of the organization, and the golden thread that connects the organization will become the priority in 2020 and beyond. We are seeing that the stakeholder demands, both internal and external, will increasingly drive operating models. Internal stakeholders would look to naturally drive performance, be mindful of the risks, the innate risks an organization has from a brand and reputation perspective. And the external stakeholders, such as the unions, the trade unions, would demand greater accountability from employers. What does that translate to then? This would mean, from an internal standpoint, the organization's preparedness, especially when it comes to situations like what we are facing now, would help organizations sort of see where could be additional avenues for managing treasury and funds in such troubling times. So which would mean war chests, strategic finance, look at M&A activities, operational synergies to wherever possible, and including the fact that whistleblowing will become increasingly important as we move forward. External stakeholder pressures will also force organizations to relook at operating models. This would mean increasing participation by industrial and trade relations and unions. So if you were to see how would stakeholder demands then work together, you would see perhaps the unions will demand a safer and efficient workplace. And that would naturally force employers to revisit the way in which businesses are configured and their offices are configured today. The third one, interestingly, is the convergence of physical and digital worlds. It's not new to 2020. We have already seen it till 2019, and it's only going to take an accelerated effort. And this would naturally mean the convergence of various digital tools and human labor, which will come together and coexist. And we would see that given this, in a contactless world, a new workforce will emerge. That will involve data engineers with the role of big data, data scientists, analytics teams, which will grow into very interesting aspects of how can real-time decisions be taken, especially similar to what happens in the investment banking world. And naturally, when you have more and more work done through digital solutions, the role of supervisors will also come to question. This would give rise to new organizational structures such as holacracy and beyond, role-based organizations, where we are already seeing there are opportunities and organizations adopting here. Last one, we would also see that the regulatory pressures will definitely increase. The role of governments participating in the aspect of running business will again will definitely come to play. And naturally, that will give rise to increased compliance and regulatory aspects of managing the business and protecting it. And such compliances and ethics will become even more important as the governments look to regulate businesses and the way in which businesses are conducted. And the role of apex bodies too will become even more pronounced. Very classic example of this slide, and just to explain it in one simple example, is to give you a perspective on what is happening with health. You would naturally see typically that health is controlled by multiple forces. It includes the WHO, it includes the governments, it includes the educational institutions, it includes the pharma and life sciences organizations. It includes laboratories, standalone pharmacies. It includes the entire ecosystem of the patients. So when it all comes together, you would see that as and when we have critical incidents, or the external and internal demands go up, or if the physical and digital worlds and the regulatory pressures come together, we are seeing in a post-COVID environment, all these forces are talking to each other on a daily basis and are coming up with strategies to evolve and to respond to the issues that are being thrown. So this is a very good example of how in the past we had disparate systems coming together in the world of 2020 and beyond. And that is exactly what I wanted to drive as a key message from here, that operating models are transitioning from efficiency to business continuity and sustainability. So even if it were to be a case that organizations revisit the way in which they do businesses, supply chains will get recast. And in the name of business continuity and sustainability, we might see organizations nearshoring more work. And we might see stakeholder pressures forcing organizations to redesign their overall operating models. So with this, I want to move and share with you some more interesting examples in what I've seen, given my experiences working with certain key clients, or also from secondary research. This slide, I certainly want to be mindful of what I'm presenting. I certainly want to also highlight that this is for the purposes of discussion and not to be taken verbatim. Manufacturing, as you would see, are industry-wide examples of how organizations are transitioning to 2020 and beyond in a post-COVID era. Organizations have seen what value-added services can further be provided in order to come closer to their customers. We are already seeing the emergence of smart factories and automation wherever possible. And to facilitate digital operations, manufacturing as such is seen as an industry where people take pride in dirtying their hands. And now in a post-COVID environment, we might even see how can those dirty hands be made clean. And that's exactly what ThyssenKrupp is doing. With the usage of Google HoloLens, they're talking about how the life of a worker, of a lift repairman, can be made more interesting by usage of technology, so that those centers of excellence can be tapped into while they're serving the customer. Interestingly, in retail and consumer products, we are seeing personalization and omni-channel experiences becoming far more important. And this is exactly what is seen with Amazon and Unilever, with their own sustainability programs and initiatives, and ways by which they could balance out SKUs and also look at convergence of digital and stores, brick and mortar stores. Naturally, this would mean enhanced usage of technology so that customers and the workers, even during the times when Amazon looked to hire people, excess workforce in their warehouses, they were mindful of the fact that this could potentially damage or threaten the workforce and their health and safety. So again, digital is again key here to ensure customers are satisfied and workers are also happy at the same time. We did talk about healthcare, and healthcare and life sciences has seen tremendous growth and also a lot of challenge, given the fact that there is innate fear in going to hospitals right now when there is obviously an imminent threat. So digital systems is helping us protect our frontline workers. Drug discovery is happening at an unprecedented rate. We are seeing the times that all of these systems are converging to ensure that health is the first priority. And these are truly very interesting days where we are seeing that the laws that will help us come up with R&D facilities or to look at initiatives that can help organizations sustain or grow in this point in time, those will all get reconfigured. And patient care, drug discovery, increased usage of digital systems to protect, to enhance value-added services, to provide value-added services, or to ensure that patients are happy is what some of these organizations, GE and Philips, are doing. Technology, of course, we've seen, interestingly, technology, unlike manufacturing, it has always been an early mover of work from home policies and others. Of course, they're given their usage of technology. And the robotics and cognitive automation, process automation is already taken into a big way into helping them see ways to exploit economies of scale. And so we would see that, again, robotics and cognitive automation will further enhance the way in which tasks are handled, anything that is routine, rule-based, or voluminous. We have, of course, seen the world of oil and gas, given the demand and supply issues, the oil prices have gone down badly, but we're still seeing that coal is the one that is powering our houses, and that is still in demand. But still, having said this, energy transition and sustainability is the growing focus of many of these large institutions. Total and Saudi Aramco are great examples. They've already moved, and they've continuously making stronger efforts to relaunch themselves in sustainability and energy transition, which is to primarily look at renewables wherever possible. Financial services has been obviously in the forefront of technology adoption and movement. And this is where we are seeing virtualization, role-based organizations, or agile ways of working have enhanced financial services to stay or to thrive in needs. Right from the time that the bank tellers were replaced with core banking and ATMs and all of it, to where we are now with virtual banks. There's an interesting bank in the UK which doesn't have any branch office. It is entirely virtual. So there are interesting solutions and opportunities that have already been in place till 2019, but have further gotten challenged given the current situation. And these are early movers who have seen certain amount of advantages coming their way straight away for not being complacent. So this is the time for not being complacent. And interestingly, what has happened till date is that change management, which is essentially one of the key roadblocks when it comes to business transformation, has gotten changed. The shades of change management have become brighter now. People are more welcoming. Organizations are welcoming change. And all of that has happened given adverse situations that we are all currently facing. And as we see a progress beyond 2020, we are likely to see more and more efforts coming in this direction, where there will be certain leaders in this industry, and certain industries which are lagging behind will look to learn from other industries, especially manufacturing, where I said it's viewed to be one where they take pride in with dirtying hands. Moving on, there is an increasing convergence of transformation levers. And these levers, when I say levers, these are some of the key attributes or key elements that will help organizations revisit their operating models and organization design. And these are helping accelerate business transformation efforts. And also given the fact that some of these strategies are all multi-pronged. We're seeing digital, and this I would want to clearly distinguish between IT and ERP. And this is the distinction that a typical chief digital officer would have vis-a-vis a chief information officer would have, the portfolio. Digital here would mean AI, ML, Industry 4.0 and things like that, which ultimately help unlock a lot of value and free up bandwidth. And this naturally has a lot of anticipated benefits, such as enabling the coexistence of human and digital labor. And in a contactless, hyper-connected world, and the world that we are in currently now and already going to be facing or taking quantum leaps towards, it's going to definitely help us enhance that, make that journey a lot more easier. We all know that ERP has been in existence for nearly 3 to 4 decades across the world, and still standardization of processes and efficiencies have not been entirely achieved. It's still untapped. So those will again get, if those were in the back burner and have not been given its due advantage, given its due respect, and that will again come to question as we move forward in 2020 and beyond. We're looking to establish shared services wherever standardization of processes and economies of scale can be exploited. And that will naturally help organizations leverage global capabilities and also standardize wherever possible to ensure that transactional aspects can be managed very well. In order to bring about long-term competitive advantage, centers of excellence will gain a lot more significance. And that's where incubation and innovation hubs will start to gain precedence over the others. And this is where centers of excellence across the businesses, across the value chain, will start to gain importance in the next few years to provide thrust on some of the areas that can provide long-term competitive advantages. And given the fact that in an environment where the CEOs and the C-suite will become transformation leaders, as soon as we get out and we start to see full-fledged business opportunities coming in, it will be impossible for everyone to do everything at the same time. And hence, outsourcing will gain a lot more importance as it restores focus on the core and explores contingent models wherever possible to focus on the areas that will truly add value to the business and not do everything else. And naturally, we are seeing that these transformation levers are converging now till about 2019 and 2020, where we left off businesses before we last saw our colleagues. But now as we get back to businesses and interact more and more, and as we revisit our previously configured strategies and business plans, we would see that all of these points that we talked about and we discussed, all those levers will get reapplied in a different way, and we would see a brave new world. And before we conclude this session, I actually wanted to spend a little more time on talking about the vision velocity matrix that I have, which I came up with, because I think the focus here is essentially organizations who need to think about bringing about changes and to accelerate efforts. And that will naturally happen only when organizations look inward. We did discuss that organizations who have been proactive enough to look at strategies, 10-year strategies, the 5-year roadmaps, minimum, have all gone back to the drawing board to think about ways to reconfigure and make it more realistic given the setbacks that we have faced now. But that isn't enough. If you were to still look at transformation strategies, it is going to be important for organizations to reprioritize and think about ways to challenge their own very thinking. And that is exactly what is happening. And in the world that we are now living in, we are going to be becoming more inward focused to look for transformation efforts than external. And that is exactly what the vision and velocity matrix is all about. Imagine the organization has a clearly set vision, and that is on the x-axis. And the efforts that help attain vision is on the x-axis. And the velocity or the speed with which those can be attained are on the y. If you want to now see what this means or this would translate to, you would be able to see that the ones, especially where the vision is low, I mean, opportunities that will help the organization achieve its vision and the speed also being low are definitely the areas that the organization would now need to start thinking and slowly even begin to eliminate. This is the lower quadrant on the left. Where the velocity is high and where the vision is low, you would see that there are opportunities. it could be a very interesting example of what DHL does. DHL might be the best logistics provider, but then if they are extremely confident of their abilities to tap into big data and look at surveys of how would the meteorological impact have on its operations, or weather impact have the impact of weather on its operations. How much of fuel burn rate would it have if there were to be tailwinds or headwinds coming together? Where the MET departments reach out to DHL, and there is a beautiful candidate that they have identified within the line of business where they can take that specific function or sub-function out to incubate and nurture. It could even be for non-profit. It could be something that the organization can choose to do if they are the best in it. A beautiful example again here during COVID times would be Tata Steel, where internally they were able to identify all the learning catalogs that they had developed. And they knew obviously they were the best in it, and they took the learning catalog out to the marketplace and published it out for everybody to see. And that's a beautiful example of how organizations could look to nurture or incubate sub-dimensions or sub-processes which they are extremely good at. Where the vision is high, but velocity is low, we would obviously need to look at ways to maintain it at status quo. What would that mean? These are certain specific activities that the organization carries out, which helps it achieve its vision in a really good way. But no matter what being the effort that is put in, the efforts are not realized at a greater rate of change or a pace. So this could only mean that we either push it from maintenance of status quo to getting obsessed with it, which I will come to, or preserve it as it is and constantly think about ways to reinvigorate it. Where vision and velocity is both high, organizations would naturally need to obsess with it and keep it constantly agile to maintain a competitive position. Now, interestingly, I have not tested this model, but this is a model which can help you think about ways to prioritize your own efforts as an organization or a business leader, whatever be the size of your business, whichever industry you're part of, whichever geography you're part of, to think about ways or how you would look to prioritize your efforts as an organization. So if you were to look at it again, it does not mean that where velocity is very high and vision is also very high, that it is really very productive and it is something that one can take their eyes off and forget. Why is it obsessing with that? Why is obsession very important here? What would contribute to a higher velocity or an increased rate of change here when it comes to vision could also distance you from your customers, could also distance you from certain processes which could look to add efficiencies. And those need to be constantly reorganized, reconfigured, thought through again from a competitive positioning point of view to enhance delivery and to ensure that vision is constantly met at an increased rate of change, at an increased pace. And naturally, what would ultimately mean here is that organizations can begin to obsess and start thinking about ways to move to the right-hand sides of the quadrants, which is both obsessing and maintaining wherever possible, and nurturing, and not get bogged down by elements that do not contribute to its vision, which is primarily to be eliminated wherever possible. So coming to some few examples, and we will further discuss it when we have the Q&A sessions after this. Just to give you a few examples here, and I thought I would conclude with this because I'm also being mindful of the time that we have at hand. Nurturing. It's important for organizations to keep in mind that there are certain key activities that the organization performs which can help bring a competitive advantage, but currently is not even explored. And this is in the course of their entire value chain, but sometimes this is not even given the due share of importance where it is required. So this would naturally mean that organizations need to start to revisit in their entire vision and their value chain as to what are the functions and sub-functions, what are the activities that they do through the course of achieving their vision that they do exceptionally well without their own awareness of it. And this is where these functions can be nurtured. So it is not something that one can say, hey, I have all my value chain, I have everything configured, and I'll have a blind one size that fits all approach. And this is to primarily move away from that trap. So naturally nurturing would specifically look to incubate some of those sub-functions and also think about ways to even not perform those activities if it is required, to even look at joint ventures, R&D labs or centers of excellence or incubation centers which can focus specifically on those efforts. That DHL example that I gave you is a good example to start to believe that this could well be the case if organizations start to look at inward efforts and their strengths to know which are the sub-functions and activities that the organization performs can be nurtured. What needs to be maintained at status quo is again very important to see that we can't take our eyes off on activities that help us achieve our vision and velocity where it is low at this point in time, but which can help constantly meet vision wherever possible. This would naturally mean thinking of the various elements that come together to stitch the efforts, the combined efforts that the organization undertakes in these areas and to maintain it at status quo. This would naturally mean that if the efficiencies and the effectiveness functions that contribute to rendering business results really well need to be maintained at status quo. There needs to be constant internal audit, governance mechanisms that fortify or strengthen those elements very clearly. And hence maintenance of those with technology, with digital solutions, with shared services, centers of excellence, wherever possible, is again going to be key to ensuring success. And obsessing where vision and velocity is high is essentially to keep things agile, because these are highly vulnerable to the impact of external world and naturally more and more challenging to even execute, because as the speed and pace and scale and size of businesses are met, sometimes the whole aspect of meeting the vision may not come in the entire scheme of things. So it could be that both velocity or vision can be compromised. Both the speed of delivery, speed of attainment of that vision, and the things that help the organization achieve that vision, the very vision itself, can be compromised. So it's important to naturally obsess. And this is where organizations can look to maybe formulate shadow boards or to involve external, like Amazon does. There is a seat dedicated where the voice of the customer it's assumed that the customer is invisible but present in the meeting. Operational transparency, for instance, where customers can be engaged. Those things essentially will help organizations see and naturally obsess with what is going well and what is not going well in order to constantly meet the vision and to be mindful of the velocity with which the vision is attained. And here again, all of the previously seen solutions, which is digital, IT, shared services, centers of excellence, and outsourcing, all of them come together to helping organizations achieve and obsess over it and to see where can velocity and vision come together to naturally keep it agile, where nothing is cast in stone. No one way of executing the business continues to be assumed. Constant reassessment of priorities, costs, the ROI, the way in which certain results are achieved, the quality of it, the pace, and naturally, how closer are we to the customer? How closer is it keeping or maintaining the financial health of the organization? How much does it help us create a competitive advantage in the long run? And those will naturally mean how would vision and velocity get translated into action. So if you can see ultimately that these are naturally the three specific quadrants, essentially the four, but elimination, if you were to remove that out, you're not entirely focusing your efforts on it. But what can organizations look to do to nurture, to obsess, and to maintain things at status quo wherever possible in order to reconfigure and to relook at their business strategies in a 2020 and beyond? It is not going to be so easy with all of it. We have seen very interesting things that are happening around us, given adverse situations like war. Such adverse situations have always brought the best out of us. We are seeing this in action even in healthcare, where we are seeing accelerated drug discovery. We are seeing automakers such as Ford were given the mandates by governments to start to manufacture ventilators wherever possible to support. Interestingly, we saw the Italian mafia laying down their weapons and to start serving the needy wherever required. We are seeing fashion brands moving away from fashion to start to create masks and sanitizers wherever possible. We are seeing distillers also supporting sanitizers wherever possible. We are in a beautiful environment where we are all collectively revisiting our vision, the core vision, in a 2020 state that we are in currently. And in a post-COVID era, when we all come together, it is going to be even more interesting and challenging times ahead. But transition and business transformation would to a greater good will become the focus and the agenda for everybody, including the C-suite. And naturally, we would see that we will have machines wherever possible, platforms, and crowdsourcing also coming together to enable us to achieve that greater good. And given the fact that this will not be entirely possible with just the organizations, we would have the entire ecosystem coming together. And the ecosystem itself, when I say ecosystem, it will include the governments, it will include educational institutions, it will include the worker unions and the labor unions, it will include apex bodies, it will include the consumers, it will include the suppliers, all of them rethinking their own entire core vision and purpose. And I believe that the vision and velocity matrix to some extent can help answer those questions. This is a model that is not tested, but I would want to leave this with you. And I would be very happy to discuss as to how this would impact your business at some point in time. And in your own spheres of business that you're carrying out and in your own professions, you could look to test it and come back and we could have another round of discussion on these areas. And I would certainly want to be very happy to hear your thoughts. I will pause here and I'll be open to having a second round of discussions as we move on and take FAQs.
Yeah, thank you, Arvind. Thanks for your valuable insights. And we have some questions that are coming in. In a traditional sector company like B2B manufacturing, will digital conferencing apps to be as effective as a regular B2B face-to-face sales call? What's your thought?
Yeah, B2B institutions were typically very far away from their customers. They didn't know who their customers were till a very interesting point of time. That's the nature of their business. But given the fact that there is a complete reconfiguration of how we would serve our customers, B2B institutions are also closely thinking about finding a fine balance. And this is where digital tools are enabling that connect. To give you an example, we had typically large institutions that were supplying maybe a throughput specific part to another major supplier who would then look to do value-added work and then ultimately translate to providing value-added services or a value-added product, we're still seeing that digital tools are enabling organizations understand their customers better, to know where can they prioritize and look at which other additional value-added services can they provide. And that's where I think digital solutions and also to look at outreach programs, I think, essentially. So these are where I think B2B institutions are seeing the usage of digital solutions.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Arvind. And also one more question. What are the opportunities do you think exist for the organization in the current scenario to reinvent themselves?
Yeah. The opportunities that are there for an organization to reinvent, I'll go back to the first slide, and I think this is a very interesting slide. I'll spend a few more minutes here.
Right.
I think the forces that are coming together from all this while we were looking at organizations primarily looking at strategy and growth and operating models from an efficiency standpoint. I think given the focus of BCP and sustainability, business continuity plans and sustainability, we're constantly now seeing where could we de-risk ourselves, especially when it comes to supply chain. And supply chain, when supply chains get recast, this would naturally mean nearshoring more work, perhaps. A beautiful example would be what some of the Middle Eastern organizations, countries have done. They've been very consciously tapping into locally sourcing and local or indigenous products wherever possible, indigenization. And this is to give rise to more opportunities for local sourcing. And in fact, in Oman and the Middle East and all of it, in some of the GCC countries, see, within the kingdom, how would they look at value-added work? And this is a great example of how organizations can also start to think about these opportunities. I think critical incidents where there is an oil spill or a 9/11 or take COVID for that instance, has made us now rethink our entire business model, rethink our entire ways of looking at business continuity and sustainability plans. And that naturally would mean that we will not put all our eggs in one basket. And that would mean reassessment of what is performed out in an outsourced manner or an in-house manner. And also to see where can sustainability and continuous impact and be made. And from if untoward incidences also come together, how do we protect ourselves, protect our assets? How do we ensure continuity of business? So this is one very important factor of BCP and sustainability. This is one huge opportunity. Apart from that, the stakeholder demands. Internally, the stakeholders will start pushing organizations to create a war chest. Will start organizations to revisit their strategic finance and the financial books that are currently in place to see where can additional funds be released to protect the organization if such untoward incidences were to happen. And also encourage the larger organizations in the communities to participate in such efforts through whistleblowing. And we are also seeing that external stakeholders, sometimes there could be activists who could look to become a minority shareholder who would try to influence externally, also happening. And this we have seen in the cases of external stakeholders coming in, pressurizing organizations to change. And that would also be another factor where organizations will start to lay more emphasis on marketing communications, public relations, and relations overall with apex bodies and the unions and the extended organization, if you will, all that coming together. The convergence of the digital and physical worlds as it exists, because we're now going to be seeing how can we protect human lives, and that's become our top priority. And where can we afford to sacrifice technology to save lives? And fourthly, we would enact the role of apex bodies and the governments will also become far more pronounced, where compliance, ethics, reporting, transparency, integrity, commitment to the larger good, all of those will gain a lot more importance. And I think these are some of the opportunities for the businesses in 2020 and beyond, because one can't afford to do strategy redesign by not looking at these four. Because all this while we would have looked at strategy keeping in mind our projected growth, certain specific price points, where our margins lie, where do we serve, what is our catchment area of customers, how do we engage in where is in the continuum of meeting and working closely with our suppliers or customers, in where do we play, to the left or to the right. But we would have looked at business strategies keeping all of those things in mind till now, but we will not be able to carry on business with just those things in mind. I am seeing that the forces that we have listed and discussed in this slide, along with business continuity and sustainability, will become the forefront of all of our boardroom conversations. And I think that's where the opportunities will lie.
Okay. Thanks, Arvind. I think Akshara has got some questions. Akshara, can you please go ahead?
Yes, sure. Yeah, so I have a couple of questions. So now, especially post the pandemic, so according to you, what are the industries that would perform better compared to certain other industries? Because now, if you see, I mean, at the face of it, it looks like certain consumer marketing goods companies, and the pharma companies or the healthcare companies could be projected to grow. So, like similarly, what are the other industries which you feel can face a growth post this pandemic situation? So the other question that I had was typically companies, especially manufacturing companies who've shut down their factories and things like that during, I mean, as a result of this lockdown, would they look to ramp up production and manufacturing after, say, a couple of months once the situation is under control? So would they look to kind of make up for lost time, or how do you think is the prediction for those B2B traditional sector companies?
Interesting questions, Akshara. So if you were to look at where organizations, even during the lockdown, were given exemptions, those are naturally essential. I think those, being food or health, which is primarily keeping, and then including power, where we are, even interestingly, during the entire lockdown period, we didn't have any power shortage. So you would have certain sectors which keeps which powers our houses, the ports, to some extent, where not entirely, but for essential goods and commodities, healthcare, food and beverage wherever possible, education have continued to grow not in its traditional way, but in its own minimized fashion, but still suboptimal to some extent, but working to meet demands during the lockdown period. So that is one where post the lockdown, these institutions will look to, because they were exposed to a lot of challenges. It's been physically impossible for some of these institutions, given my conversations with some of them, given my consulting experiences. I've seen that, be it the dairy institutions, for instance, while milk has been coming out and being delivered to your doorsteps, there are challenges in meeting the needs of customers. It has not been something that organizations have been making money during this lockdown. It is still suboptimal. There are revenue erosions and the margin erosions that have definitely happened, including health, where people are afraid to now go to the hospitals. Our own doctors are afraid to come to hospitals now. So there are industries which were typically under the realms of being essential, which were operating, also facing the trouble. So they would naturally look to come back in full vigor and correct some of the challenges that they faced, meaning strengthen some of the under-evolved dimensions, maybe look at enhancing ways to protect their workforce a lot more, or protecting their financial health of the organization by relaunching certain value-added products wherever possible, or to look at new avenues for growth. So this is one, definitely, where industries, but industries that have taken very adverse measures and industries that have already experienced a downturn prior to COVID and now will have a definite challenge. So you might see that the automotive industry, which already had a global slowdown, they were locked down entirely, and we had Maruti and others completely reporting zero sales during the lockdown period. And now, while we know that there are institutions who are coming together, are starting to increase production, but they're looking at very minimal shifts. They're not looking at all the 3 to 4 shifts that are happening, including the relievers coming together to have very aggressive plans and rollout of SKUs. They're looking at very, very minimal production, ensuring that worker safety and health is not compromised. Now, interestingly, manufacturing, however you say, is an institution where people love dirtying their hands. It also accommodates for a greater space and capacity as opposed to the IT technology and ITES institutions, where people generally the space constraints and open office setups have typically been encouraged. Now, open office setups like the banks and investment banks, where it originally came through, was to encourage workers, the employees, to stay a little more longer hours and to perform longer hours at the workplace. And naturally, this would definitely stand to get questioned now, as we see. And naturally, employers are thinking about ways to make it far more safer, and that's number one priority. Health, safety, environment is the topmost priority for everyone. And this will naturally mean that when organizations look to lift their and start production post the lockdown period, will naturally see production and supply chain disruption facing them, still lurking large, but then naturally that will need to be overcome at some point in time. And so we will definitely see that production will get enhanced. How and when, to what extent, is a factor of demand supply from a supply side as well. And also given the fact that how much does it put workers and the brand and reputation at risk. So if the financial health is not really appropriate, then we might even see some exits and M&A activities taking precedence over the other.
Yeah. So, thanks, Arvind. And I think Dinesh has one question. Dinesh, can you please go ahead?
Thank you, sir. So my question was, how do you see the traditional industries that rely heavily on, front-end client interaction to, change in the future, given these kinds of developments? So you've said that, companies are focusing more on BCP and sustainability, and they're moving towards adopting technology more openly to, change their business models. But if you take, for example, strategy consulting for one, it involves, a lot of direct client-to-client interaction and, convince. I don't know if it would be the case if we adopted technology differently, but the general idea is that for convincing clients to go ahead with their projects, etc., a direct client interaction would be more effective than would be and even if it's a one-to-one call over online or otherwise. So, and the same could be said for even B2C interactions, where people have to try to sell in person. So how do you see that changing?
Interesting question, Dinesh. Let me try and answer it in giving you some examples. So strategy consulting consulting always has thrived given a lot of interactions with the customers. Customers always believe that it is time for consultants to come into their doorstep and work under their nose, usually. But here is where digital solutions and DIY as self-service benchmarking tools have also helped organizations. When consulting organizations realized that adding value is the core purpose of consulting, and people, of course, is one of their key. In many consulting organizations, you would see that the employee costs is significantly way higher. So this could be extrapolated to all industries where employee costs are very higher, and naturally their first priority is employee health and well-being and safety. This is exactly why TCS and others have started to look at work from home, and the new models that have been proposed this is re-emphasizing the same fact. You would see that the consulting organizations are no different. It is one of the oldest surviving professions. And digital solutions, as well as minimizing interactions and to ensure self-service benchmarking, to enable that the customers still benefit out of the consultant. There is not too much heavy reliance on physical presence to analyze and to assimilate data. That has naturally changed. So you would see that typically, audits, for instance, which are all performed with a lot of work performing, remotely, have all moved to e-audits these days. And these tools were not, it's not that these tools were non-existent at an earlier point in time. The e-audit mechanisms have been in existence for a very long time. But these have all gained precedence over the in the 3 months period and beyond. We will see that this will naturally become the forefront of execution, because if it threatens worker or the staff health, it would become the first priority. And it is all done in light to add tremendous value, as opposed to being present and not contribute enough. And this is where I think self-service benchmarking tools, e-audits wherever possible, digital solutions wherever possible, are all enabling consulting organizations to make or to sustain or to thrive wherever possible. Because I think some of the projects that were earlier that have just kicked off have all gone on hold. Large-scale transformation engagements, the cash cycles have also increased. The days outstanding are also constantly increasing. Naturally, consultants are not traveling. At one point in time, consulting organizations used to typically would find consultants more at the airports than at the workplaces. All of those are all coming to question now. Clients are demanding that you solve my problem wherever you are. Work happens regardless of where we are anyway. And digital tools and self-service benchmarking is helping clients see greater benefit from where customers, from consultants. And naturally, when it all gets lifted for priority projects, this will be the first time that clients will say, let us revisit if we need to for physical presence, and also very cautiously admit consulting teams to come in. So this is one. And we also see that where industries have a very high touch point, for instance, health, or take the instance of salons, beauty salons, for instance. These were all high touch points. Back in the day when the kingdoms existed and the kings loved to have their own, personal masseuses and all of it, their barbers and were the most trusted people. And they would never change their barbers, because they would be the closest to wielding a knife. And if something were to go wrong, they could just slash their throat. And naturally, very high touch. And this has moved to DIY now. Because that is something that is not risking too much of lives at this point in time. So we are seeing either DIY coming together, do it yourself, where it is not putting you too much at risk, or wherever possible, technology again coming in to ensure that the physical workplaces are maintained with a certain specific standard, hygiene wherever possible. Food, for instance, where food preparation, food handlers were at a greater risk. And there again, now we are seeing contactless delivery wherever possible, contactless cooking wherever possible. So we might typically see that institutions which were averse to even moving or adopting in the past, saying, hey, this is high touch, this is something that we would not be able to afford because that compromises our very interest of being in business. They are now redesigning and rethinking their ways of doing business. This is again, like I said, COVID and the environment that we are now in is forcing us to rethink this very purpose and core objectives.
Got it, sir. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, there is one more question from Paresh Kerkar. He is asking, when the strategy for most of the IT companies like TCS and all that to reduce its cost, especially after COVID, how do you think the budget is going to be, how the strategy will be?
Sure. So interestingly, work from home in IT environments, interestingly, let me just quickly give you a point where BCP earlier for all the global organizations was something that was taken for granted. It was always part of their strategy book. It had to have BCP, but there were very clear assumptions that were in place. Let me give you an example of call centers. Call centers were physically thought out where employers would clearly maintain certain specific protocols, where voice recording would happen, customers would be interacting through a specific channel, and those will get recorded for quality training purposes, like they say, of course. They've all moved to IVR now. And work from home has enabled technology to be coming in to help employers manage that entire business continuity, and also sustainability, from a fact that if we were to continue to allow employees to come over to their offices, would that potentially damage reputation through putting employees through any potential health risks if that were to happen? Now, like I said, IT institutions, ITES institutions is where typically you would see large floor spaces with cramped working spaces. I mean, I don't have any specific references here, but I'm saying no matter what that the admin team say, there is a certain element of open office setups which are not encouraging employees to stay away from each other. Social distancing norms can definitely be questioned here. And this is where the institutions, especially technology, media, telecom institutions, especially IT, let me replay it back to IT in the context of where the question was, where employee costs are significantly high, we would see that the focus is naturally on the employee first. And business strategy is reaffirming that, where work from home policies are coming to light even more at a greater detail. If it temporarily were to even prove to be slightly invasive in certain regard, that is encouraged to some extent to ensure that worker health is taken care of. Wearables wherever possible. We are seeing organizations are encouraging employees to do workouts through monitoring their Fitbit app and their movement inside their households. And that's an interesting thing. So you would see that employee assistance programs, wellness is naturally taking the first priority. Second is business continuity, where not compromising on customer interests and keeping their revenue channels alive is the second focus. We're also looking at the digital convergence of digital worlds and physical worlds, taking a big, believe you me, before this entire effort, IT institutions were already working towards launching value-added services through the digital technology tools that they had in mind. And those will gain a greater significance as we look forward to reconfigure strategies as we move forward. And not just that, we would also see that the entire concept of bench and artificial bench in certain institutions where especially in service industry, you would see that those are also getting questioned in a very big way, because we're now seeing as to what the order book is the order book sustainable, is the financial health of the organization anywhere in line with what we are expecting from a projections and a financial projections point of view. And all of those are again getting questioned from a reconfiguration of business strategy point of view. So the answer in short, financial health will become number 2 or number 3 priority, but number 1 priority is employee costs and employee health. Clearly keeping that in mind. IT institutions have also become, they've been big proponents of co-working spaces, and co-working spaces are also something that definitely allows worker flexibility, and flexibility will become definitely the order.
Okay, thanks, Arvind. And one final question from my side, if no one asks any question. So according to you, how the transparency in communication by the top leadership with its different stakeholders during this crisis play a vital role?
Sure. One of the biggest challenges in business transformation is naturally change management and leadership buy-in.
Right.
Leadership buy-in and change management is essentially fundamentally important to drive efforts. Good news is that COVID has already made us rethink our some of these impediments, and especially change management levers, which have traditionally been a big impediment or a roadblock to implementation. I see more and more institutions coming forward and saying, in 3 years ago, 5 years ago, we looked at another digital transformation effort, which went into the back burner. We never even bothered looking at it, but now we would want to look at it, given the need of the business and the need of the hour. So this is one where institutions and leaders are primarily seeing how to communicate bad news wherever possible and boldly taking those steps, engaging the workforce at a greater level possible, engaging the larger ecosystem, not just the employees, but their families, extended organizations wherever possible. Because we know that the boundaries of home and work have now collapsed. Originally, people were even calling out this is to be an oxymoron, work from home, really. But now all those terminologies have all gone out of the window. Employers are becoming more emotionally intelligent, naturally, given the fact that we need to engage. We're seeing that there is also a greater amount of fatigue and over communication. So the leaders, again, it's one of their important tasks to reduce the burden and fatigue that we are naturally facing, and to make simplicity the key priority. Communication and transparency the key priority in doing business, wherever needed, to upfront communicate and to manage efforts where people collectively face the burden and not just the top management who faces the heat. And this is where we are seeing that shadow boards, intrapreneurship, opportunities where voice of the customer, voice of the employees will all become far more pronounced as we enter in 2020 and beyond. Open house forums, constant communication is again becoming far more enhanced. We are seeing large institutions, small institutions alike, where leaders are now spending their time productively by communicating these very messages to their employees, their larger stakeholders, their shareholders wherever possible, including the unions, engaging them, working closely with suppliers to look at nearshoring opportunities, working with suppliers to look at indigenization of products wherever possible, to co-develop new products wherever possible. And we are also looking at engaging the larger solution providers, such as consultants, apex bodies, also enhancing through leadership communication. So we're finding leadership communication also reaching out through the outreach programs to communicate with the apex bodies wherever possible. That is also happening. Again a good aspect that is coming through. Right. In short, communication is absolutely paramount, and we are already seeing that COVID has taken away some of the change management roadblocks that we typically were facing, and people are approaching it with an open mind. The good news, and I would want to just pause with this interesting thought process, as we come back and relaunch ourselves, we would find that both the employees and employers and the entire ecosystem comprising education institutions, suppliers, governments alike, apex bodies alike, all of us going to continuously rethink and revisit our core purpose. And that, I think, will undergo a big change. And when we relaunch ourselves, we would find to confront a very different and a brave new world.
Oh, great, great. Thanks, Arvind. I think that's all from our side. And thanks for your great insights on the current and future scenario of business. And also you explored it wonderfully as to how different themes will impact the business and the areas to focus on. Also, you offered some great examples from your professional experience with the MNCs like Amazon, GE, Philip, and Google, to name a few. I'm sure that the participants have gained valuable inputs from this webinar. Also, thanks once again for your wonderful time. I would also like to thank all the participants for their time. This is a wonderful evening. Good night to everyone.